my perceptual filters may be broken or damaged. I'm not sure. I'm open to that possibility. I'm only human, and God knows you would forgive me for having slightly damaged or warped perceptual filters in a year like 2020. But I was thinking, people were asking me frequently, they ask me for book recommendations, and the 3 books I would highly recommend are by Cormac McCarthy. Best pieces of literature that I've read in the last 2 years. I mean, he really is a master wordsmith. He really is a great craftsman. And the 3 books I would recommend are all very American and very much about America. They are Blood Meridian, about the formation of America. The Road, which is about the dissolution of America. And it's a very tough, Blood Meridian is tough. James Franco holds the rights to make Blood Meridian, but it's such a violent book. I will warn you. It's very violent. It's very psychedelic. It's very apocalyptic, fascinating, totally compelling book. Brilliantly written, wonderfully written, but tough. The Road, tough, not psychedelic, very sparse, very clipped, but excellent, really excellent, hard going. But it's a book fundamentally that is about love and is about optimism in the most adverse circumstances. And then finally, I would recommend No Country for Old Men, which is almost the book that's about the transition between the formation and the dissolution of America. Now, I said my perceptual filters might be broken because people were asking me about it, and they said, "Oh, what book do you recommend?" I said, "Oh, start with No Country for Old Men, and then watch the movie afterwards. They're great renditions. The movies are excellent. That one's by the Coen brothers. It's really good. The rendition of The Road, I can't remember who the director is, also excellent, brilliantly performed. And let's hope James Franco eventually, is it James Franco or Franco? Doesn't matter. Eventually gets studio backing to make Blood Meridian. And let's hope that we see Vince D'Onofrio as the judge in that role, because his whole life has been building to this one role. So perceptual filters breaking. I started thinking about No Country for Old Men, and I was like, I wonder if this is a political movie. And then I was like, no. Your brain's getting warped. You thinking about everything in terms of money and power these days. Everything I'm thinking about is money and power. Many of you follow my work. You'll see that I will talk about what's going on in 2020, but I don't want to add to the noise. I don't want to add to the confusion and the speculation. So I've been very careful, and I wasn't careful with the first 2 videos I released, and then I started being very careful and to do my best to stay in my lane, which is, I don't regret that. I think, I should be seeking to, with as much discipline as possible, offer a perspective that is just, tightly from within what I know about and what I can talk about. I'm not qualified really to talk politics. And when I'm talking politics in this video, I mean, in the most general sense, I don't have an agenda. I don't believe that backing Team X or Team Y is the great resolution to all humanity's woes. I don't believe if Team X or Team Y gets in, that it heralds the doom of society. I don't think it's, even though everything is highly politicized, I don't think the fault is in politics. I think it's in humanity, and it's in narcissism. So very briefly, I got to the idea that No Country for Old Men was actually political with a small p, generally, because I won't give you any spoilers. It's a deconstruction, actually, of our hero mythology that is fundamentally narcissistic. Our hero mythology tradition is an exercise in narcissism, in megalomania, in ego strokery. You hear the stories of great heroes and you put yourself in that role, and everything works out well for the hero. He or she defeats the enemies, kills the dragon, and gets the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or whatever it is. And we vicariously and narcissistically, with a small n, not as NPDs, obviously, as with a small n, vicariously enjoy the trauma, the drama, the struggle, the striving, the pain, without risk, of course. And then the great victory is also ours. We share in Frodo's great victory in Mount Doom. We share in, you know, the victory of Hawkeye at the end of Last of the Mohicans, though it costs him greatly. Another great story about America. Last of the Mohicans is a really, really great film about America, similar to The Revenant. And it's a good book. Highly recommend the book, Last of the Mohicans. It's tonally very different, but it's still a great book. So what I was thinking about, and then I watched No Country for Old Men again a few nights ago with Pierre, and I was more convinced, not less convinced. Sometimes I have these ideas and then I'll go back to the source material and I'm like, you've projected stuff here that isn't here. And I watched it again and I was like, no, this is actually a story that is a deconstruction of our narcissism. The protagonist of the movie, and if you watched that awful film by Nolan, who seems to have lost his mind, Tenet, they didn't actually bother when they were writing the script to give the protagonist a name. They simply called him protagonist and clearly felt that that was very clever. It isn't. And they did many things in that film that they clearly felt were very clever. They weren't. It's a very stupid film. Very stupid, very pointless, and almost impossible to hear what's going on. It's unintelligible. And I'm bothered by it because there's a general tendency towards spectacle trumping plot and sort of flim-flam and magic trickery to make you feel like you're an intelligent member of the audience, but there's really nothing there. I mean, the whole idea of objects moving backwards through time during our timeline is so mind-numbingly stupid. I nearly tore my cinema chair in half in frustration. The last 40 minutes of that film were the most painful I've ever spent in a cinema in my whole life. Bloody awful. No Country for Old Men deconstructs the idea, several ideas that are narcissistic and dangerous and full of hope, the toxic hope that we've been talking about in other videos. Well, all hope is effectively toxic. The narcissistic hope that everything will be okay, when in the real world it isn't. Does it serve you to believe magically that everything will be okay, when in the real world it isn't? The idea of order, our notion of order, that we can passively wait and everything will just return to order, is deeply challenged by the movie No Country for Old Men. Good guys and good girls win. No. There will be, after all this suffering, a great resolution. No. It's way more real life than that. And when all is said and done upon the stage in No Country for Old Men, you're left not with a bang, but a whimper. And you're left with more questions than answers. It's a very discomforting film. It's a very disturbing film. Because of that meta-narrative nature, meta-narrative style that it adopts, which is, it's almost a story about storytelling and criticizing storytelling. And in criticizing that storytelling, making commentary about narcissism, but it's the narcissism of the audience and psychopathy, but it's the psychopathy of the protagonists. They are the ones who are taking action. They are the ones who are getting things done. And they are the ones who are doing things for the most arbitrary reason. Again, I don't want to give you plot spoilers. Film's been out for a while. You should have watched it by now. You should definitely read the book. But literally on the toss of a coin, lives are gained or lost or destroyed. Innocent lives gained, lost, destroyed on the toss of a coin. And I do think there is a criticism from Cormac McCarthy there, of our storytelling and of how our storytelling has made us, big U, us, US, big U, United States, and all of its vassals, all of its outposts, which would include the United Kingdom, because we are all living in America, effectively, culturally speaking, that we've been drinking from a poison chalice for a long time. And it's a poison chalice that we're the ones making it. We put the ingredients in. We know what tastes good. We know how we want to feel. We know what we want to vicariously enjoy with no risk. And it's a challenge to that. And I think the Coen brothers understood that very well and made the film in complete congruence with the values of the original story. Thank you, whoever the higher deity is, for that, because a lot of films don't seem to be able to do that. It's a very, very congruent film. It adheres to its own rules. It adheres to its own tempo and tone. But it is a criticism of broad-scale cultural narcissism. And there does seem to be a little bit of a challenge to the way things are going. The arbitrary, nihilistic leaning of the mass, of the group. And that's embodied in the main bad guy, if you like. And even in the tools he uses to dispatch with people. It's arbitrary, it's functional, it's industrial, it's soulless. It almost comes from a place of zero intent. Even when he is hurt, he doesn't seem to particularly feel one way or another about the fact that he is hurt. It's a great rendition, perhaps the best rendition of a pure psychopath. He has rules, but they're the rules of a post-apocalyptic world. But he lives inside of a civilized world, which is what makes him interesting. He's completely out of sync with the world in which he's living, but it makes him a very powerful character. He has his own rules, but his rules are of a savage, dog-eat-dog, zero-sum game world, zero-sum game world. And really a terrifying and very funny character, played brilliantly by Spanish actor Javier Bardem. I couldn't imagine it would ever be with the best haircut ever. I couldn't imagine it being played by anybody else. The face, the voice, the expressions, everything is pitch perfect. It's really, really good character portrayal. So I highly recommend it. Try and watch it from the point of view of a meta narrative about storytelling. When you look at every character and every plot twist, think of it in terms of narcissism, but not the narcissism of the characters, which is there, but it's not so interesting, but how each character appeals to the narcissism of the audience and the challenge being laid down by the craftsman, by the author who wrote this to the audience. Who do you think this character is? What do you think should happen to them? What do you think will happen to them? And let's see. Oh, we're back. Did a bit of training this weekend, perhaps a little too much. So I wanted to go through with you a what I jokingly and provocatively called a red pill philosophy around narcissism and anti-narcissism. And it's inspired by the book and the film No Country for Old Men. And it started from, I mentioned this, those of you who follow my work closely, and if you don't, why don't you? Why? You should. It's great. It's great. I think I said it about a year ago. It's interesting to say, it's interesting and informative to say one of the traits of narcissism is arrogance, or you could say that person is arrogant, or you could say we as a culture seem to be becoming more arrogant, or you could say the demeanor of the people in that particular extremist, polarized, radicalized band of whoever they think they are and whoever they think they represent, whilst clearly, you know, not fully compos mentis, they are arrogant in their approach to the subject, and they are arrogant in their approach to reality. It's interesting and informative to say that. And I hope this isn't too pompous and pretentious sounding, but I thought it was actually more arrogant to flip it, more interesting to flip it on its head and say, what's the opposite of arrogance? and then to identify where that is lacking. So if I say, I know a person and interacting with them is so hard because they're so arrogant, you get one picture. This is a year ago. Actually, it started more than a year ago. It's when I was in Ibiza, and somebody who I met in Ibiza, and I was interacting with them, and I was like, this person is not a bad person. They're not a bad person. There's nothing particularly awful about them. But they seem to have a critical lack of what would be the opposite of arrogance. And I said it was humility. So I've got some notes here. So I was like, I've got the 9 traits from the DSM of narcissism here. So that's probably illegible, or even if you could see it, my writing is so awful anyway. So I wanted to put the antidote to arrogance would be humility. Because in this individual case, I found I could understand and predict their behavior much, much better if instead of saying this person is really arrogant, saying that they have a critical lack of humility. B.B. Rodriguez just said a lack of self-reflection, examination, exactly, which is what humility opens the doorway to. The ability to reflect, the ability to examine our own actions. And I thought that's interesting. That adds some nuance, that adds some depth to be able to say this person suffers from a critical lack of humility. There seems to be, because we could identify the toxic trait, which is very normal, mainstream psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry. It kind of medicalizes it. You have, because if you're looking at a virus, you're looking at a condition, you would identify the symptoms. Right, that's what the DSM does. It's kind of like an attempt at a medical manual, because if we say the patient has, I don't know, red rash on their hands, a bendy toe, and their left eye is twitching, then you look at those symptoms. Doctors now, obviously, they don't remember everything. They just go online, they just flip out their phone and go, it's like a list of symptoms. Sometimes I've seen them doing this in hospitals. The last time I was in an ER waiting room, it was for my knee, and I could see like a group of doctors and nurses huddled around the laptop, desperately trying to find. And I was sat there and I was going, "Hey, I think I can do that. I think I can put." So, but anyway, they were struggling with something, and it made me laugh. So you identify the symptom. So here we say, here's the symptom. But if we turn and invert the model of psychotherapy and psychology and medicalizing everything on its head and say, well, where is there a lack? What's the strength or the skill that the client or the group is lacking in? We could say a lack of humility, a lack of ability to examine themselves, a lack of critical thinking, where critical thinking is you critique your own thinking. As you think a thing, you question the thing that you have thought. It's a wonderful skill. And if we all learned it and adhered to the discipline of it, there would be a lot less trouble amongst humans, because we don't do that naturally. So we have to learn it. We have to add it on, because a lot of the things that we just do spontaneously and naturally with zero impulse control, they lead us to dark places. There's another one. You all know these 9 traits of narcissism, I'm sure. Grandiosity, which is an unrealistic sense of self-importance and that they are better than everybody else. Being grandiose is putting yourself, to use other language, and to through using other language to seek to find the inverse, if not the opposite of grandiosity, to get insight. So if you say, I or my special group is particularly important, we are certainly very, very important, and this is our moment in history, and we are probably, for various reasons, of superior importance to everybody else, and therefore, through virtue of being more important than everybody else, de facto just better. We're just better. We're just morally superior. In a person, that's annoying. In a group, that's dangerous. Do we see that now? don't want to do overtly political videos. It's not my place. But I can't just sit here and watch this shit show unravel and not say anything. Do we see that? Should we call it out? You know, maybe your point of view, maybe your stance, your agenda, your objectives have value, but my God, could you dial down the grandiosity? It would really make it a lot more palatable to consume what you're saying, because a lot of it makes the listener want to throw it back up because it's imbued with arrogance, a total lack of humility, and a really inflated sense of self-importance. So here's the thing, whether it's an individual or a group, guess what? Your suffering isn't special. Nor does your suffering offer you any status in the world. You're not morally superior because you've suffered. Again, back to storytelling, back to Cormac McCarthy and the film and the book, No Country for Old Men. This is a poison we have concocted for ourselves and drunk over and over again. We're the creators of the cocktail and we're the drinkers of the cocktail. I don't believe that this is some grand scale nefarious conspiracy. I think we just like the flavor of the ingredients in this toxic tale cocktail. It's a toxic tale of a cocktail that we've been creating and that we've been imbibing. Because when you watch a film and you read a story and the hero and the heroine is doing what they're doing and you're identified with them, that's critically important, isn't it? You know his name. What's the dude's name? Our protagonist in No Country for Old Men. Very lovable rogue. It's 1980, I think it is. He's a Vietnam vet played by pleasantly visaged, nice voiced Josh Brolin. Probably late 30s, very capable man. And we like him, and he's important. But we know from the psychology studies that if his situation was described to us, but it was laid to a collective, and we didn't know all of the people within the collective, that we would identify with the person whose face we have seen and whose name we know. That's grandiosity. Some people say, no, that's empathy. And I would say, no, that's one of the pitfalls of empathy. You think that that's empathy. You're focused on the person you know because you've imbued them with importance, because you're putting yourself in them psychically, though not physically, one would hope. The next trait, so we have arrogance. Oh, what's the counterbalance to grandiosity? So if a person or a group has an unrealistic sense of self-importance, I think we're back to humility again. I think we have to be back to the original Cynics, the original Greek philosophy school, the Cynics, and the Stoics, which is, yes, you suffer. Yes, your story is important to you. And even that is covered in No Country for Old Men. Tommy Lee Jones says to his wife, he's a lovable sheriff. He's the good guy with the cowboy hat on who doesn't like to take his gun out. It's funny, laconic, insightful, and full of old world Texas wisdom and sayings. And they're talking at breakfast, and she said, how do you sleep? And he said, I had dreams. And she said, tell me them. And he basically says, dreams are only interesting to the person who dreamed them. And his wife lovingly says to him, I'll sit here and be polite. And then he tells his dreams. But our dreams are only interesting to us. Your story, your pain, your trauma, your burden is utterly fascinating to you. But what would it be that would be the counterbalance to that? I'm not sure. Humility is part of it. But to be able to say, look, I know that this is important to me, but it's important to me because it happened to me. It doesn't have to be important to you. There's humility. It's a bit of compassion, I think, and awareness of boundaries. Maybe being boundaried would be the antidote to grandiosity. And to just say there are other people. They also dream. They also have fears. They also have goals. Being aware, being compassionate, knowing that other people dream, knowing that other people have goals, and knowing that their story is the most important thing to them, just like it is to you, would probably help. Another trait of the classic narcissist is that they live in a fantasy. They live in a fantasy. Where are we seeing that now? Where do we see individuals and groups and collectives just living in a total fantasy? A fantastical story that is self-aggrandizing, self-glorifying, and justifies bad behavior. Do we see any of that in this world today? Do we see an aggressive, violent response to anybody who challenges that fantasy and who questions that story? Do they hold what are the equivalent of modern day inquisitions with the torture and the burning at the stake for anybody who dares to question living in a fantasy? What would be the antidote to insisting on living inside of a self-glorifying fantasy? Choosing with discipline and humility to attempt to live in reality, to prioritize reality and truth and facts and objectivity as much as we can. Yes, science is full of corruption. Yes, scientists are bastards as well, and they can be paid off and they shag their students and snort coke or whatever else. Of course they do. But that's not an excuse to say, oh, bugger science, or bugger the facts, or bugger history, or bugger what we know. Yes, history is written by the victors, but that doesn't mean you throw it out. In favor of what? We don't have anything else. In favor of your fantasy story? No, thank you. I'll take the story written by the victors because hopefully it has some traits or some traces of truth in there. I'm not going to throw it out. What is this crazy Orwellian 1984 love of erasing history anyway? Do you know that's what Winston's job was? Speaking of protagonists and narcissism and stories, Winston in 1984 had one job, and that was deleting people from history. It was erasing people from photos with the Fuhrer or with Stalin who had fallen out of favor, deleting them. It was ironic because in the end, all photos and all videos of the writer apparently disappeared after his death. So the opposite of living in a fantasy would be to prioritize truth, objectivity, and trying. Nobody can win. We can't win this. We can't live in objectivity. We're entirely subjective creatures. Nobody really knows what the truth is, but we should try. We should try to be truthful. We should try to live in accordance with the data and the facts. So that would be one potential antidote I would offer to that. Ooh, this one's going to hurt. This one's going to hurt. Another trait of narcissism, being very needy, being very hungry, being very, very thirsty, of constant admiration, and not just a thin trickle of neutral, polite praise either. No, this is adulation. Needy of constant fawning, over the top, bottom kissing adulation for how wonderful and special we are. It's another trait of narcissism. Do we see this in individuals? Yes. Does social media feed this dark taste? Yes. Do we see it in groups? Are we seeing groups who scream hysterically and offer violence as a threat if they are not constantly patted on the bum and told that they are wonderful and special and their pain is so unique? Nobody has suffered the pain you have suffered ever. Everything you have to say following that realization is just gold dust. Please spill your truth into my ear holes. Needy of admiration, a neurotic lust for praise, constant. And if it's possibly taken away or challenged or questioned, the response is, because this is narcissism, a toddler's narcissistic rage, a temper tantrum. But when temper tantrums play out in toddlers, usually they, fall on the floor, kick, shout, scream, poop themselves. But in adults, it's much more dangerous than that. A narcissistic rage temper tantrum can manifest as killing people, can manifest as destroying other people's property, destroying other people's livelihoods. It's a temper tantrum. It's narcissistic rage. And it's born of pure narcissism. Pure narcissism. So neediness. So what would be the antidote to somebody who is very needy and needs an awful lot of praise that tells them they are special and wonderful? Smack on the arse? Sent to a underdeveloped country to do charity work for 2 years? I think that would sort a lot of people out. I really do. I'm that guy now. I sound like my grandfather. No, he would have said, what we need is war. That'll sort them out. I don't want war. But I wouldn't mind sending some people to some of the countries I've been to. You know, people in the first world use words like oppression and exploitation, and the words just spill out. They just fucking spill out. Genocide is another word I'm hearing a lot. I'm thinking, do you know what the dictionary, are you just using that word? What's the film where the guy says, that word you are using, it does not mean what I think you think it means. What is that? Is that, I think maybe it's Princess Bride. I'd love to send them to countries that have been ravaged by genocide. I'd love to send them to countries that, I mean, I'm living in one, that was ravaged by an evil political ideology like communism. I'd love to send them to Bosnia to see what went on there. Still plenty of places you can go in Bosnia where there are mass graves of an actual genocide. So, and throughout all of Yugoslavia, these places still exist. They're still there. Africa, been to Africa. See, if you want to talk about oppression and exploitation, maybe go to Africa. Try Cambodia. People talk a lot about poverty and of being underprivileged. Go up to Phnom Penh in Cambodia and see what the kids are doing on the roadside there. And then we'll have a conversation. So, but that's not a cure. That's not a psychological, philosophical cure. That's like saying, okay, send people away, which is completely impractical and would only take place in my fantasy utopia in which I am the dictator. Needy of admiration and needy of a constant supply of adulation. Neediness first. Neediness. If you're in need for a sense of self-worth from others and you're very thirsty, you're very hungry for that, you know, it's tempting as a, you know, from the psychology point of view to say, my God, what happened to you in your childhood? Is there some childhood trauma that needs to be resolved here? Were you not given the attention that you need? Perhaps you weren't. Perhaps you didn't have parents, or you don't even need, humans can adapt. You don't even really need parents, but you do need adults there to show you love and attention for sure. Did you miss that? Are you traumatized? Do you need therapy? Do you need to go, and it's, you know, childhood trauma is not an easy thing to overcome, but maybe you need therapy. If you are very needy on the adulation of others, you're in a very weak position. There's a very, very weak position to find yourself in. And very precarious, because it's hard to bully people into telling you you're wonderful all the time. It's exhausting, in fact. And it would be much easier if that sense of value was coming from you, if you were the source. That's the route I would go with that. I don't really have like an antidote to neediness, because I think that probably is a deep scar. There's probably deep scar tissue there that needs to be dealt with. So if I wanted to be trite, and I don't, the trite superficial answer would be, you need to find value in yourself. You need to find a purpose in your life, and you need to work towards that purpose, and you need to understand the nature of sacrifice and of carrying your bloody burden and taking responsibility, eh? And of actually doing something so that you don't need the approval of others, because you don't feel crappy about yourself all the time. The next one is entitlement. It's pure narcissism, by the way, guys. I'm not going outside of the DSM, 9 traits of narcissism. Do you know any people or groups who are saying that they believe that what they want, they should get because they want it. I call this the X Factor effect. Over the years, these reality TV shows where it's like America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent, X Factor, Simon Cowell. I think it's they're usually Endemol Productions. And you get these, you get the backstory of the person who's going to go on stage and sing a song or juggle fire or whatever it is they're going to do. And they're sad backstories. This is good entertainment. I understand. I'm not criticizing it. I don't want to see, if we just watch people juggle or just watch people sing, it's going to get boring. You want the backstory. You want the human drama. You want to provoke the emotions of the audience. That's how you keep them invested. Get it? No problem. No problem at all. But I noticed, obviously I don't watch it now. I haven't watched it in over 8 years. I noticed there was a really strong tendency for people, especially the younger people, to be saying when they fucked up and they couldn't sing very well, or they couldn't juggle fire very well, or they couldn't dance very well, and they were told, you're not good at the thing you're doing, their response would be, but I really want it. And I was like, oh. Now, the first time I heard that, I went, oh, okay. And then I heard it again and again and again. So they would stand up in front of a group of adult professionals who do this for a living. That's all they do, is find talent, process talent, or they've done the job themselves and are super famous as singers or dancers or fire jugglers. And then these people who are qualified to say, by the way, it's not all subjective. Your singing voice is not good. It might be one day, you know, if you did years of training, maybe it would improve. Maybe you don't have the ability, but maybe with a lot of work it would improve. But right now it isn't good. And the response would be, but you judges, people who are qualified, say what's good and what isn't. I really want this. And I heard it again and again and again. And it got to the point where I was like, that doesn't matter what you want. Again, we're back to grandiosity and entitlement. It doesn't matter that you really want this. What kind of world do you think you live in? Do you think you live in the world of the average Hollywood movie, or do you live in the movie and the book, No Country for Old Men? I would suggest the latter. You're not living in a movie where people get what they want because they want it. You're not. Let's be grandiose ourselves. Imagine a world where the cosmology and the machinery of the world was that the more you wanted a thing, the more you got it. But it was just that. Like, so people who made 20 grand a year, they didn't really want money. People who made 100 grand a year, they wanted it more. People who made 10 million a year, what made them have 10 million a year wasn't work or cleverness or craftsmanship or professionalism or delivering a good service or a good product or being a great inventor or being great at customer service or just learning how to do business over decades. Was that they really, really, really wanted it. They really. So your want is this big, his want is that big, her want is that big, but this want is like, really? Like, imagine the world as a ginormous machine, as a clock, and one of the components of people getting the life that they would desire was simply want. No action, just wanting it. And then they go home and they go, I didn't get what I wanted. Maybe I didn't want enough. So there is entitlement here. And entitlement fundamentally is that people believe that what they want, they are entitled to get just because they want it, without work, without action, without discipline, without consistency, or any of these things. Well, I would argue that on this one thing, this is probably the one trait out of the 9 that I see the most in our culture, our current culture, because we're very wealthy. We're very wealthy relative to the rest of human history. We're living like kings. We live like emperors. The average person lives like an emperor, if you compare to human history to this day. So opulence becomes the problem, in a sense. I mean, it's part of the context that creates the attitude, right? Affluence becomes the problem. Well, perhaps there's a solution for that too. We'll just take everything away from you. see how you get on. I wouldn't do that. I'm not that kind of a dictator. I wouldn't be so cruel, I don't think. well, we'll see. We'll see when I get there. Maybe I'll change. The power will go to my head. So what would be the antidote to this? And if I give an answer for any of these that is okay but not great, and you have a better one, just write it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. So perhaps the antidote to entitlement, I think, is you know, if you look at like philosophies like Buddhism and existential nihilism, and you kind of turn it on its head and you say, you know what? I'm not owed anything. I'm not owed a happy ending. I'm not owed what I want. Nobody owes me anything. Or I've said it a few times. People really like it, though it's not mine. It's from Ayn Rand's boyfriend, whose name escapes me right now, in the 7 pillars of self-esteem or the 5 pillars of self-esteem, where he says nobody's coming to save you. So there is an infantilized element to this, where we clearly believe somebody's coming to save us. We think that it's Christmas time, and that Santa Claus is coming to bring us our presents that we wrote on our wish list. But, like, that's just not real, by the way. It's not a thing. It's not happening. You're not going to get what you want. Nobody's coming to save you. I'm sorry if I have a twinkle of sadistic glee in my eyes, but I understand and am compassionate to how much pain this causes the individual who carries it. But I'm also very alive and aware to how much pain the individuals who carry this nonsense in their heads cause others. Again, politically, do you see people hysterically screaming and throwing tantrums because they believe that what they want is what they should get? And when they don't, they have no resilience, they have no dignity, they have no emotional maturity to deal with the fact that they weren't given the specific colored Lamborghini they were promised. And this is the worst thing that's ever happened to a human being in the history of humanity. I wanted the purple. So the opposite of that, I would say, would be a philosophical one, or the antidote to that would be to say, you know, remind yourself, you're not owed, I'm not owed anything. And I don't need that much, actually, to be happy. I need to be uninterfered with by others. I need my freedom. I need to hold my individual space. I'd like to be uninterfered by my own introjects from my own trauma as well. I need to know who I am and to pursue the things that I love and to pursue some sort of a mission and a purpose. That's it, really. If you've got a long list of things that you absolutely need in order to be happy, I would suggest the longer the list, the smaller the chance you will ever experience any state akin to what any of us would understand as happiness, peace, or contentment will occur for you in this lifetime. It was a long sentence. I hope it made sense. The next one is, the next narcissistic trait is they're exploitative. So interpersonally exploitative is what the DSM says. They take from others, they manipulate others, they take what is not offered freely, they assume, they presume, they are presumptuous people, and they take without consent. They take from a place of spoiled brattery, like, no, we're just doing that. We just want that, so we're just taking it. Or we just want this to happen, so we're just going to do it. Whilst the adults sit back and say, well, we've not really agreed to that. Like, you can't just do whatever the hell you want. Individuality, individualism, sovereignty, agency doesn't mean you do what the hell you want to other people, because that would be a narcissistic interpretation of sovereignty, because other people have sovereignty. Your group is not the only group. Your interest is not the only interest. There are other people with other interests. I feel like this is the kind of thing you'd have to explain to a 4-year-old. Other children have toys, and they are their toys. Now, you have your toys, and it's nice to share your toys, but you can't take the toys from other children and keep them. You have to give them back. Or, if you're going to play with another child's toys, you should ask their permission, because that's nice, isn't it? Do we all agree? Does anybody have anything hysterical and screaming to respond to over what I said over the last 17 seconds, as though I'm talking to a child. Like, am I wrong? Is this not what we should do? Do we teach children, if you see it and you like it, you take it because, yeah. Or if you get a toy that you don't like, throw it at someone's head. Stamp on it. Don't think of giving it to another child who might want it. Just stamp on it and break it. Because if you don't like it, nobody should get to play with it. Maybe we should start with the basics, guys. I don't know. Do we need to? Do we need to go back and just be like, okay, this is how grown-ups act. This is how grown-ups mayn't act. You mayn't steal other people's toys and stamp on them. No. You can't take other people's stuff. You don't have a right to destroy other people's things. Did you forget that? Or were you just never taught that? I'm enjoying this more than I should. It's a terrible time to be alive. It's terrible. The world is crumbling. This reality is literally disintegrating daily. It's receding. The line is receding back and back daily. So they're interpersonally exploitative. So what's the antidote for a person who's exploitative? Is it I mean, I feel like you're only going to be exploitative if you're entitled, if you're grandiose, because I put grandiose at the top on my scribbly scrawly list, because I thought, here's a little thought experiment for those of you who are interested in the topic. Try and be a narcissist for a moment. Do the thought experiment and just think. Just get in their shoes for a second with compassion. And just like, God, but imagine one of your perceptual filters broke and your sense of reality broke, and you just woke up one day. Thought experiment like this. You woke up one day and you knew, not thought, you knew in the core of your being that you were more important than every other human on the planet. Cleverer, sexier, more brilliant, funnier, had more to contribute, had more important, I don't know, solutions or whatever your field is or whatever it is. And you knew that to the point where your self-glorifying fantasy was not a fantasy to you at all. It was just like, no, I everything else that comes after that is a footnote, frankly, which is why classical narcissism in the literature used to be called, and sometimes still is, but more rarely, grandiose narcissism. So the word grandiose comes before the narcissism, because if you just say somebody's self-centered, it doesn't explain all of narcissistic behavior. Self-centeredness doesn't explain narcissistic behavior. Grandiosity, however, everything else makes sense. It's not even, imagine, have you ever stepped on an ant or a spider? I mean, we do it accidentally. We don't even see the little blighters. You just do it. Maybe if you saw other humans as minuscule ants and spiders that you would occasionally accidentally step on. And maybe if you're having a bad day, you deliberately step on. Imagine your scale of perception was like that. Everything else would make sense. So the exploitativeness thing, I think, is a critical lack of an ability to see that other people also have toys, also have fears, also have needs, also have lives. I'll come back to number 10 in a minute. Zero empathy. How would we, what's the antidote to zero empathy? There are exercises that you can give to people. Unfortunately, the literature indicates they have to be quite young. The human in question has to be quite young, probably under the age of 15, and probably needs to do it for a few years. But you can statistically, clinically, significantly increase empathy with exercises where you would deliberately put yourself inside of the other person's shoes. And you train yourself to think that way, like, what is the other person thinking? What is the other person feeling? And it says empathy here. We would add compassion to that. So there'd be a boundary element to that, where you just say, okay, that person's life is their life. This is my life. I can't not have an impact on them. It's impossible if we're in communication. But let me see if I can reduce or be very careful of any potential for negative impact I'm having on that person. That would be helpful for dealing with the zero empathy part. Envious, being extremely envious of others, I think probably trickles down from everything else. What would be the antidote for envy? I think would be gratitude. Be grateful for the toys you already do have, kid. They might not be as awesome as the kids next door, but your toys are pretty cool too. There are kids with no toys, so maybe be grateful for the fact that you have some toys and that you have arms and legs to play with them and the health to play with them. Some kids don't. Doesn't matter what toy you give them. If they can't get off the bed to play with them, they're definitely in a worse situation than you are. So be grateful for what you have. So the antidote to arrogance was humility. To grandiosity was to try and increase the awareness of the person. To living in fantasy would be to try and live in reality. Of being needy would be to try and be the source of your own validation in your life, not through setting up an Instagram account and posting pictures of your bottom cheeks in a thong, my dears, but by doing something useful and contributing to the world in a way that's meaningful and purposeful. Being entitled, having a sort of nihilistic, existentialist Buddhist philosophy that you're not owed anything, nobody's coming to save you, nobody needs to give you anything, the universe doesn't need to do anything for you, nobody needs to do anything for you. That would be helpful. Being exploitative, the antidote for that would be to realize, I think, that there are other people and they're just as important as you are, at least to themselves. The last one, number 10, I don't know why this isn't given in the DSM as another trait. There are different traits. I said I would talk about this 2 years ago and I never got around to it, that I think are equally as important, that should be in the DSM, but that they aren't. But this one is being abusive. That would include demeaning others, intimidating others, bullying others, and belittling them. What's the antidote to that? Again, it feels like we need to go back to a sort of toddler level training where we say, look, I understand that when you don't get what you want to a nicety with immediacy, that you feel angry and frustrated, but we don't bully. We don't threaten to get what we want, because little Timmy, little Sally, if you bully and threaten to get what you want, everybody else you're bullying and threatening is potentially just as capable of using the same tactics against you. So if you're going to offer violence, eventually you might run up against somebody who offers equal or perhaps greater violence back. So it's actually not a particularly smart strategy for operating in the world. Bullying, intimidating, belittling, abusing, demeaning others, shaming others, guilting others. Well, how long before that same strategy and those same tactics come back to haunt you? Again, he said with a sadistic twinkle in his eye, are we seeing that in any group or grouping of people on the political spectrum these days? We are. I find it delightful to see the snake eating its own tail or disappearing up its own bottom hole, whichever way you prefer. And it happens to all people of this political, ideological leaning. Always in history, the snake eats its own tail, because when you set up a political ideology, and we have this broad scale, that is a kind of new orthodoxy that requires that you pass purity tests, along a long enough timeline, your day in court will come also. The people who put this stuff forward think that they will always play the role of inquisitor and always play the role of judge. And they don't realize, for some reason, maybe they're not into history, maybe they don't read books, maybe they've never heard of Stalin, maybe they've never heard of the Khmer Rouge, maybe they've never heard of a chap called Mao, maybe they don't know what went down in Ho Chi Minh, with Ho Chi Minh. Eventually they come for you. Eventually they come for you. Along a long enough timeline, you will be in court and you will fail the purity test. Why? Because you're a human. You couldn't possibly keep up with this orthodoxy. It's generated by lunatics. And I mean that. Lunatic is a term, it's a dismissive term, it's a rude term for people who are probably psychotic. And it was believed, Luna as in lunatic, Luna by the moon, it was believed that as the moon waxed and waned, their psychosis would go up and down. Could be one of the derivations for the werewolf myth, because they would come out on full moons. There's been research that indicates there is more violence during a full moon, apparently. I don't know how valuable that research is. But it is lunacy to the extent that it's psychotic. The new orthodoxy, the new Inquisition is being run by psychotics whose lives are not in order, whose minds are not in order. So, of course, the purity test shifts day by day. You would have to be awake and aware 24/7 and moving continuously to keep up with the purity test. And everybody sleeps. Everybody takes a week off. You know, torturing other people, rounding them up and shooting them is exhausting. So everybody needs a little week off. And you don't know, somebody could drop your name under interrogation because they need a name to drop because it's uncomfortable having your fingernails pulled out. And then it's your turn. And you will fail the new purity test, because the purity test of today is not the purity test of yesterday. The purity test of this afternoon is not the purity test of this morning. And nobody is pure from these internalized, unconscious crimes. Because we're humans, and we're imperfect, and we will always fail an orthodoxy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for your time and for your attention. And I look very, very much forward to speaking to you again soon.